Okay, so by way of introduction, we are in Shrewsbury. It's a town of about 75,000 people. Traditionally, it was the largest town in this county of Shropshire. These days, it's the second because the modern town of Telford has overtaken it. But it's been a seat of local and regional power and a trade centre for over 1,000 years. And as you might imagine, over 1,000 years, lots of things have happened here. Lots of big events have gone on because it was a significant place in this part of the world. A major settlement on the border and for the ruling and administration of the English-Welsh border area and also the administration of Wales itself. So we're going to be exploring some of the dark side, and let's see where we are starting. Well, we're starting just outside Shrewsbury Castle, but the castle is very poorly lit. You might be able to just spot a little bit of the tower of the castle through there. And actually, one of the good things, this truck has pulled up to the gate of the castle, and what that means is they've opened it. I think they're setting up for some kind of event. So I'm going to hurry up here very quickly. And so we can actually see the walls of the castle. So it's on the highest point, perched above the River Severn. And that's why the town is where it is. It's a strategic location on the River Severn, close to the border with Wales. And the castle was originally built in the 11th century, but the fortified walls that we see today are actually from the 13th. And I think they'll let me just... This is the main gate to the castle. These days, there's not much of the medieval castle remaining apart from these outer walls. The main building that's in the castle now is an 18th century mansion that was built for a wealthy local family. And is now a military museum for the Shropshire Regiment. So, but the castle area is known for its associations with a particular figure whose ghostly presence is still said to be here. And he was around about 700 years ago. His name was Jack Blundell. Jack Blundell was an officer in the castle garrison. So not a senior, not the leading man, but quite a respected officer. But he had a big secret that nobody knew about. Now, what people did know about Jack Blundell. Your lights have lit up this gate brilliantly for my tour, mate, I'm telling you.
Yeah, man. How you doing? What are you doing?
I'm doing a virtual stream, a live stream ghost tour.
Oh, sick, man.
So we are beaming out around the world. So Jack Blundell was known to his colleagues and other people at the castle at that time as being a bit of a ladies' man. He liked nothing better than to be out in the town of Shrewsbury. Oh, wow, I'm going to move out of the way.
We're listening to you now.
No. I'll come out the way and you can take over the spot. No, I'm afraid not. No. I've got a competitor. So this guy's going to be telling the same stories, but I'm going to let him come and have his little moment by the illuminated castle gate. So Jack Blundell, he liked getting into the town. He liked the local young ladies. He had something of a reputation. But what people didn't know about his reputation with the young ladies was that his intentions were not just to have a good time. They were much darker than that. During the time that Jack Blundell was serving here at the castle, 7 local girls went missing. Now, no suspicion ever fell on Jack Blundell because he was a respected officer in the castle garrison. But the problems for him started with his 8th victim, because he had told yet another local girl that they had a future together and she should leave her family and come to him at the castle so they could run away and marry. And like others before her, she had fallen for the silver tongue of this smooth talking soldier. But she didn't do what he said, because he said, don't tell anyone what's happening. She told her sister, she confided in her sister, who was very suspicious, especially when her sister disappeared, but Jack Blundell was still being seen around the town a few days later. So she decided to sneak up here to the castle to see what was going on. And what she saw as she came up here and hid one night was, as darkness fell, she saw Jack Blundell come out of the garrison building inside the castle and make his way across the courtyard of the castle, just inside the gate where we stood. And he was dragging behind him a corpse that she recognized as Mary, her younger sister. Now, she was terrified. She didn't want to challenge him straight away because she feared for her own life. So she went home and spoke to her family. And the following day, the family as a delegation came and spoke to the senior officer at the castle. And the local militia, when Jack Blundell was away from the castle on patrol, they went to look in his quarters. In the quarters that he was occupying in the castle, they found a box. And inside that box, they found 8 sets of fingers and 8 sets of toes. The trophies of a serial killer taken from his dead young victims. What had he done with the bodies? Well, he would drag them off somewhere. People think he must have either dumped them in the River Severn or maybe even fed them to the pigs that were here as a food source for the castle garrison. But Jack Blundell was then arrested when he returned to the castle, and he was immediately executed for the crimes that he had committed. And he was buried just outside the castle, in a patch of ground that is just behind the hedge, and it's pitch black over there at the moment. But he's not the only person to be buried there. Jack Blundell's ghost, well, it's seen in the castle precincts. People have reported seeing a figure of a man bending over as though he's trying to carry or drag something, moving across the castle courtyard. They have also heard screams of female voices, perhaps those of his victims. He became known as Bloody Jack, and that was the name that he was passed down in infamy as Shropshire's medieval serial killer. Anthony, his motive, I don't think he had a motive. I think he was just a deranged serial killer. Took pleasure in killing and mutilating his victims. Nicola, I don't know. I don't know whether he was physically attractive or just charming. Maybe both. Maybe it was the fact he was an officer and a respected figure as well. Now, he is not the only ghostly presence associated with this area, because this building stands just next to the castle. It's called Castlegate's House, and it's a beautiful example of a timber framed building that was actually moved here piece by piece and reconstructed by the owners, the family that owned the castle in the 18th century. And people have reported that as they've walked past this house, they have felt a sense of being jostled, even though there's no one there, And people have even reported feeling as though someone is trying to drag them by the arm or the clothing towards this building. And this has been linked to the fact that the burial ground for the castle was on that site. Maybe Bloody Jack and his victims, maybe some of the other people who were killed here. And the people killed here unjustly, other than Bloody Jack's victims, well, that was in the Civil War. This was a royalist town, but there was a traitor in the ranks. A man by the name of Captain John Benbow. Captain John Benbow was a traitor, and he made a deal with the enemy, and he went down and opened one of the gates to let the soldiers up into the town, into the castle. And they took the castle without needing to besiege it or without a battle. Part of the deal was that Captain Benbow and his men were allowed to march out of the town unscathed and leave the castle to the conquerors. But that agreement did not cover a small detachment of Irish soldiers who were serving here in that same army. They were taken straight out the back of the castle and executed. For no reason, just the fact that they were serving in the wrong army, and they were buried here. And the presence of these unjustly killed soldiers, Irish soldiers, their restless spirits, has been blamed for the strange experiences that people have reported walking past this building, Castlegate's house. So I'll go and it is a very pretty house. Now what now I'm going to, it was, oh, uniform, yeah, well, I didn't want to be the one to say that women like a man in uniform. Something about a myth. How much myth? Well, I'm telling the stories as they've been reported and recorded, Jim. You know, I can't speak for, I can't tell people whether to believe in supernatural things or not. I'm telling stories of what has been reported and the incidents in history that people have linked them to. The family was the Pulteney family. They were the family that owned the castle and owned that house. Now, I don't know where this actual ghost tour is going with all these people on it. I hope they're not going to be following the same route as me all the way around, because that would be very annoying. We're going to make our way up towards the top of the town and hope that they're not. He was in a monk's costume. Brother Cadfael, that's whoever's fault it was. Whoever was asking about Brother Cadfael, it's your fault. And a fellow's appeared dressed as a monk with a bunch of about 20 people on a ghost tour. Oh, I don't mind competing ghost tours. That's nothing. I mean, you go to York in the height of the visitor season, there are about 15 different ghost tours running every night in York. In fact, it looks like there's another one running here as well. 2 different ones running tonight apart from ours. We're going to go up here to the old site of one of the old market crosses of Shrewsbury. The highest point in the centre of the town, really. The castle's kind of built on the outcrop, but the centre of town was where one of the crosses was, what has been a marketplace, and also a meeting place where announcements were made to the public in the days before modern media, and a place that has very gruesome stories linked to 2 rebellions against English kings. Now, the hill that runs up from the centre of Shrewsbury towards the castle is called Pride Hill, and that's named after a wealthy family who lived there in medieval times. Pride family, so they were the sort of landowners in that area. So it's not named after the Pride festival that we have these days or anything like that. It's named after Pride family. But they made a replica of the medieval cross back in the 20th century because it had long since been destroyed or torn down, or I'm not sure what happened to it. Nobody seems to know. It had been gone for a couple of 100 years at least. But here's the cross that they put up in its place. And I'm going to tell you about two things that happened on this site. And they're not really ghost stories, but they're very gruesome and they're very interesting in terms of the history. And there is also a ghost story to tell on this spot. So the first event I want to tell you about concerns the execution of a Welshman. Now, I know Linda, I don't know if we've got any... Angela, we don't know exactly whether it looked exactly like that or not. There's not really... It's in the style of the cross, as the cross from that era would have looked. They didn't know exactly what the one here in Shrewsbury looked like, I don't think, but they based it on similar kinds of crosses from other places. Now, I don't know for how many Welsh people we got on the trip tonight, apart from Linda, but the Welsh rebel, Dyfed ap Gruffudd, 1283, a Welsh prince who rebelled against the rule of King Edward I and was captured. What do you do with one of the leaders of the uprising? Well, King Edward I summoned a parliament to conduct the trial of Dyfed ap Gruffudd, and he decided for the first time to invite a wider representation of people to the parliament. So every county of England got to send 2 representatives drawn from its population, and each of the 20 largest towns in England got to also send 2 representatives drawn from its population. So it's believed to be the first parliament in England ever to be held with genuine representation of the common people. And so they convened at a little kind of manor house just outside Shrewsbury to decide on the fate of Dyfed ap Gruffudd, and they, needless to say, they decided they were going to execute him, and he was executed right here on this spot. And he was the first person believed to have been executed using a new and particularly gruesome method that they had come up with for traitors at that time, which was hanging, drawing and quartering. Which means they hang you until you're nearly dead, then they cut you down, they cut open your body, they pull out your entrails and burn them over hot coals while you are still alive. And then when you're dead, they cut your body into 4 pieces and display them at prominent points as a warning to other potential traitors. So a really gruesome execution on this site, and this is not the only rebel that was associated with this place, because 120 years later, 1403, there's a big battle on the edge of Shrewsbury, the Battle of Shrewsbury, between the forces of King Henry IV and the rebel forces of the Duke of Northumberland, led on the battlefield by his son, Henry Percy, better known as Hotspur. These events depicted in Shakespeare's play, Henry IV, Part 1. And Henry Hotspur was killed on the battlefield. But the supporters of the rebellion, they didn't want to believe that he was dead. And there were all kinds of rumours going around that he was still around, you know, that he would be coming back to restart the rebellion. And it was a conspiracy being put about by the king's forces that he'd actually been killed. So they decided they needed to put down these rumours. So they went to the battlefield, dug up Henry Percy's body, brought it into the centre of Shrewsbury, and hung it here at the market cross for all to see. So then everybody was in no doubt that he was dead. Now, I said there was also a ghost story here, as well as stories of medieval rebellions, and it concerns the building that is now Greg's fast food takeaway. But that building nowadays, the post office is part of the W.H. Smith store opposite, but in that building there, or its predecessor, used to be the main post office of Shrewsbury, and it is believed to be haunted by the ghost of a soldier from a much later era, specifically the First World War. He was a local man who he lived in that building where the post office was, or adjacent to it, and he had some leave. He was an officer in the British Army during World War One. He had some leave, but he couldn't bear the thought of going back to serve again in the trenches. He'd just seen enough. He couldn't stand it, and he knew the punishment for desertion, which was execution by firing squad. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. He wrote a letter to his commanding officer explaining that he was unable to return, and then, using his service revolver, he shot himself in that building he took his own life rather than go back to the trenches of northern France. And the figure of an officer in uniform has been reported in that building, particularly in the basement area and in the sort of the corridors at the side of the building over the decades ever since. Such a horrible story, and but I think, if you ever get the chance to read anything or see a documentary about the way that people who tried to get, to desert rather than be exposed to the horrors of the trenches, they were young boys, a lot of them, and they were just taken out and shot at dawn, executed, firing squad. It's absolutely horrific, really. So let's make a bit of progress. We're going to take a shortcut through the church. Oh no, we are going to take a shortcut through the churchyard. I thought the gate was closed. Now, this is a church where I don't know of any ghost stories. It's called St. Mary's. It's not lit up either, so that's okay. We're going to discover some ghosts associated with a couple of the other churches very shortly. But, that was a loose paving slab. And that was another one. Oh, we've got some good lighting up ahead. Wow, look at that. Nicola, your granddad was in the 100 next December. So he'd been in World War II, yeah? Yeah, wow. Yeah, never knew our maternal grandfather, but he fought in World War II as well. Okay, so very interesting building ahead of us. It looks a bit like like a theatre or something, but it is actually kind of a independent shopping arcade, and there's apartments in the building as well. It's called the Parade, but the building originally was the Royal Shropshire Infirmary, a huge hospital, one of the first major hospitals to be built outside London in this country, and it was opened in the 18th century and was a hospital until the 1970s. And there are two ghosts associated with it. I mean, there may be more. Hospitals often, there's a lot of suffering, a lot of death, and all these kinds of things where you might associate with hauntings. But there's two that have been well documented that I want to tell you about. The first of them concerns a ghost that has been seen so often by staff in the hospital that they even gave him a name, because nobody really knew who he was, and they called him Fred. Now, when the hospital was operating, one of the things they did, other than just treating the sick, they had like a soup kitchen around the back. So what would happen was that they would have a soup kitchen at the back, and poorer people of the town would be able to come up to the hospital and they would be able to get some hot food. It was a way of almost trying to improve the health of the population to perhaps stop them needing the hospital. And obviously local people who were poor would be quite regulars. But it appears that one of them is still trying to come up there to get his soup, because the ghost that is seen, he's a figure of a man in old-fashioned clothing, brown trousers and a green jacket, looking quite scruffy, but he's always seen at the back of the hospital, right where that soup and the hot food and those supplies were given to the poorer people. It's almost as though whoever he is who passed away all those years ago, he's still turning up, and the staff at the back of there working in the offices or in the different parts of the hospital used to see him standing there. There were times when he's been seen several times in the same week by different staff, and so he's a really frequently seen ghost during the time this was the hospital. Now, the other hospital ghost is a figure of a lady, and it's a figure of a lady that was seen as a sort of an indistinct figure standing at night. Sometimes patients would see this figure, sometimes staff, standing at the bottom of a patient's bed at night. Not doing anything, just standing there. And the thing that people realised when they reported this, more and more people saw this figure. And what they worked out was that the patients concerned whose bed this lady's figure was seen standing next to passed away in those nights. Now, there are a couple of theories that people have put forward. One is that it's a ghost of a nurse who is somehow trying to provide some comfort to these patients in their last few minutes and hours of their lives. The other is something darker, that it's a presence that is almost a precursor of death that is coming to almost escort them on their way. But it's a very strange phenomenon that this female figure was seen standing at the bottom of the beds, and the patients would die in that particular night. Not that patients who were previously healthy would, I mean, they wouldn't be that healthy if they were in hospital, but, it wasn't like patients who were recovering would suddenly have this figure at the bottom of the bed and then they die unexpectedly. But it was more like they just kind of worked out the coincidental thing that the people whose bed this figure had been seen next to had. Been people. Oh, I'm going to get off the road. Again, we don't want to join them. A beautiful building lit up here. I mean, it's this is a really historic building. It was the guild house of one of the most wealthy trade guilds in Shrewsbury, which was the Drapers Guild, so the cloth merchants. It's been here since the 16th century. There must be ghosts in there, but I can't find any information about them in books or websites or anything. There are, a lot of places where you think this building has so much history and so much, must have so many stories to tell. But if they're not ones that are written down and shared, then that car is making funny noises. Now we're going to head down into one of the oldest parts of town, and we're going to be looking at a hotel called the Prince Rupert Hotel, and it is named after, guess what? It's named after Prince Rupert. Who he, I hear you ask? Well, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, to give him his full title, was the nephew of King Charles I. And King Charles I's nephew was the sort of senior commander of the king's forces in the English Civil War. And this, as I mentioned when we were at the castle, was a royalist supporting town. And so a lot of the officers and soldiers of the royalist troops, when they were passing through this region, would be billeted within the town of Shrewsbury. And at the time, the building we're looking at now, which is the oldest part of the complex of buildings that are now part of the modern hotel, this was a house that belonged to a local politician, a wealthy local family. And it was with this family that Prince Rupert and his senior officers actually stayed while they were in the area during the Civil War. And they were staying here before going off to fight. Didn't the king kill him? No, not to my knowledge, Angela. I'm not sure what happened to, I'm not sure whether he fell in battle or what happened to Prince Rupert. The king certainly didn't kill him. They stayed here. And so the house where he stayed, when it was later a hotel, they named it after him. Okay, so we are going to go around the corner and have a look at a bit more of the hotel, because it's basically a modern hotel that has been all kinds of different buildings jumbled together and knocked together into one large complex. And Prince Rupert himself is not believed to haunt the building, but one of his officers is. One of his senior officers stayed there on another occasion during the Civil War, and he went off to fight and was killed. And a figure that has been seen walking the corridors of the Prince Rupert Hotel is believed to be that of this particular royalist officer. He is seen, quite a sort of a middle-aged gentleman, walking the corridors with a candle in his hand. Hello again. No, please don't. I'm not allowed to film children. It's not fair. It's not fair. Thank you. So people see the figure walking along the corridors, and the candle that he is holding does not cast any shadows. There's no flickering or shadow of the figure on the walls. And as people approach the figure, he either just disappears or walks through one of the modern walls or doors of the building. So plenty of people have seen this over the years, and they include a film crew, because in 1984, Shrewsbury, this part of Shrewsbury, played the part of Victorian London in the George C. Scott version of A Christmas Carol. And the cast and crew, a lot of them were staying at the Prince Rupert Hotel, and they saw this particular figure walking the corridors in the part of the hotel where they were staying. Now, there's also a female ghost in one of the rooms of the hotel, room 5, as it happens. And that was the room where in the 19th century, a young lady stayed who had come to Shrewsbury to get married. But the day before her wedding, she discovered she wasn't getting married, because she'd been, not only had her fiance been cheating on her, he'd actually married somebody else. Let her come up here for the planned wedding, but he'd actually married somebody else in the intervening time. And the distraught woman went back to the hotel and hanged herself in the room, which is where her ghost has been seen many times since. People have seen a female figure in that room, and there's also been kind of poltergeist activity reported, people feeling as though someone is sitting on the bed when they're there, and things in the room being strewn around when they come back, even the bed sheets being pulled off the bed. But the very strange thing is, it's almost like she's trying to get back at men for what her fiance did, because the only people who have had trouble with the poltergeist activity and who have seen that ghost, the only times, is when a man is staying in that room on his own. Okay, so let's head down the steps a little way, and we'll be right on the street where many of those films, many of those scenes in the Christmas Carol were filmed. These are called the Bear Steps because there used to be a pub at the bottom of here called the Bear, and this building here, which is now a gallery, used to be a private residence and a guild hall. It's about 600 years old, and the steps are a little bit uneven, so I'm going to be very, very careful as I walk down them. Now, just above where we are, I don't know how well it's lit, but hopefully we will soon be able to see the church tower of St. Alkmund's. No, not really. Oh, light it up. Oh, we can a little bit. It's not a, you know, it's very grainy, but that's the church tower of St. Alkmund's, 160 feet, or about 55 meters high. And the church tower and the church itself was rebuilt in the 18th century because it was in pretty poor condition. So St. Alkmund's was rebuilt at that time, and one of the people who was involved in the working on the tower particularly was a local steeplejack by the name of George Archer, who was something of a local character. When he was working on the tower, he would go up there and he'd perform tricks to make local people laugh. You know, he was right up there on the tower. You know, they didn't have safety equipment like we have today back in the late 18th century. But what he would do up there, he would say, "My name is Archer," and he'd take a bow and arrow up and he'd be balancing it on the top of the tower and firing arrows around. He also took a drum up there and he was beating a rhythm for people to clap along to as he was up there. So he was a bit of a local character with his death-defying feats up there. One particular day, he was in the pub next to the church, the Three Fishers here. This is called Fish Street, so it was where the fishmongers were in the medieval town, the Three Fishers. And he and some of his friends had been having a few drinks, and his friends dared George Archer to climb up the tower and bring down the recently installed weather vane, so metal weather vane that was on top of the tower. And he said, "Yeah, okay." He was up for anything after a few drinks. So off he went. He got himself, climbed up the tower, got the weather vane, hauled it back down here, and there'd been a bet riding on it. His friend said, "You know, we'll buy you. There's eight pints of beer for you if you do this." So he got it, and they said, "Fair enough. Line up the 8 pints, landlord." And George Archer set about lining up his beers. And after he'd drunk about 7 of his 8 pints, his friends started to get a bit of guilty feelings about stealing the weather vane from the top of the church. You know, they started thinking, well, maybe that's not the wisest thing to do. So they said, "Look, George, you know, there's another few pints in it for you if you take it back." So off he goes, old George Archer. But of course, he's 7 more pints worse for wear. He manages to get up to the top of the tower, manages to reattach the weather vane. But then as he's starting to come down, misses his footing and splat down here at the bottom of the tower. That is the end of George Archer. But it's not the end of him being seen, because people have seen, not on a dark night like tonight, you can only just see the tower. People have seen in daylight or on light nights a figure climbing up the outside of St. Alkmund's spire, as George Archer did on his little escapades to entertain the local people, and specifically on the day when he did it once too often after 1 pint too many and fell to his death. There's the Three Fishers, beautiful old pub. the original smoke-free public house. Well, must have made that before the actual smoking ban came in. It's good. Things people do when they're drunk. Well, yeah, that's right. Now, very close together, two churches. That's the reason why St Alkmund's. Oh, we're going to get a better view of St Alkmund's now. Look from here. He says, not really. That's bizarre. I can see the tower better from here, but it doesn't show up so well on camera. That's strange. Anyway, St Alkmund's is still a operating church. The one adjacent to it is no longer operating. You know, they didn't have enough congregation left for two churches. Can we see it? Can we see the tower? Not really, but the tower is not important on this church of St Julian's. What is important of St Julian's is the wall here, the retaining wall around the churchyard. Now, in the 19th century, when this was still the church was still open, the churchyard was still in use for burials. It was an out-of-towner who was staying at one of the nice hotels in the town, and unfortunately, he choked on part of his dinner at the hotel and didn't make it. He choked, and one of the local physicians was called and pronounced him dead. Now, they were really worried because they didn't want to be getting a reputation as a place where a town and a hotel where people die when they're having their dinner. So they decided to keep it all very, very quiet because it was an out-of-towner with no contacts, and nobody really knew much about him, who he was. So on the say-so of the local physician, they hurriedly brought him to the churchyard and buried him. Now, later, within the same, I think later the next morning, people walking past here started to hear cries for help coming from behind this retaining wall. When they went to investigate, they realized it was coming from the newly dug grave of the man from the hotel. It appears that the physician had been a little bit hasty in pronouncing him dead. So they started to dig down to try to get him out. But as they were doing that, it all went quiet. And when they got down to the coffin, they opened it up. He had, in the meantime, died, presumably lack of oxygen. The top of the coffin had grooves in it. His fingers were bloody and all messed up where he'd been trying to somehow claw himself out of his premature grave. And people have said that as they walk down this road late at night, they can hear, coming not from upwards, from directly on the other side of this wall, scratching sounds and the sounds of someone crying for help. Buried alive, not a nice way to go. Is there a nice way to go? I don't know why they say that, really. Now, we got two more quick stories to tell you. And I'm going to tell you one about a pub. We like pubs. The old post office is a pub. Now, this is not a post office in the sense of where you go to post your letter. It's always been an inn. But, back in the day, the coaches that were travelling across the country were carrying people, but they were also carrying letters, parcels, all of those things. So the coaching inns, they doubled up as post offices and places where you would have your things delivered from and to. So this was an important coaching inn. There were big stables at the back and so many coaching inns in this part of town, horses and all of those things. The smell was very, very ripe, let's say. And there were a couple of ladies who used to sell little sprigs of lavender outside the hotel here, just in the entranceway. And that was so that people could smell something a little bit fragrant to mask the smell of all the horse manure and all of the things that went with the coaching trade. They're long gone, apart from the fact that people say sometimes when you walk through the corridor. Now I've got a cold, so it's we can't go, and we can't. I know my signal will go if I walk all the way in, but people have said that. No, I can't smell it, but people get a very strong smell of lavender to this day. Angela, I thought it was quite funny actually. Now, the other ghost associated with the building is the ghost of a former member of staff, a maid who worked at the hotel back in the 19th century. And she was murdered in the hotel. Her body was found strangled in the cellar, but no one was ever arrested, or no one had any idea ever who had actually killed her. And her ghost is believed to haunt the premises. People have seen a young woman's ghost, or a figure of a young woman, in the cellar and the surrounding areas, and also strange things in some of the rooms. Poltergeist activity again, of things being moved and interacting with guests in a strange way, tidying up their rooms. And there's a story a few years ago, a chap stayed here on business. And he was very messy. He left his stuff scattered around the room while he went off to have his meetings and everything like that. You know, he just threw his clothes down. And when he came back in the evening, not only was the bed beautifully made, his clothes were neatly folded and placed on the bed. And when he went down to go and get some dinner, he spoke to the boss, the manager, and the reception, and he said, "Oh, good job for your cleaning staff, your maids. They've tidied up my room and folded all my clothes beautifully." And the manager said, "No, what are you talking about? Nobody has been in to tidy your room today." Only the ghost. And if I knew where you could get one of them, folks, well, no, I'm not strictly being honest with you. If I knew where you could get one of those, then I would take them home with me. If I knew where you could get two of those, I'd take one home with me and let you guys have the other one to tidy your houses up. On the basis that they could do the tidying at home, that'd free up more of my time to come and do tours for you. How about that? Can't say fairer than that, can I? Now, one final story, and it is quite a tragic one. An old church stands here, the site of an old medieval church. The churches, kind of bits of it are still there. And you can see the churchyard raised there. It's called St. Chad's Church. But it was very seriously destroyed in a storm. The tower collapsed and it caused such severe damage to the building that in the 18th century this was, that they, rather than rebuild it, they built an entirely new St. Chad's Church. And this area became just kind of a public park and garden around the site of the old church. But the street that goes up the side of it used to be called Candle Row. And the reason it was called Candle Row was because people who were going to special festivals and pilgrims and these kinds of things, as they were making their way up to the church for the mass or whatever it was they were going there for, they would carry candles. Now, carrying candles in a medieval town made predominantly of wood, not the world's greatest idea. And so it proved, because in the 16th century, the wooden house on the corner where this house now stands was set alight by a dropped or sparks or something from the candles being carried to a major religious service up there by the worshippers. The fire caught alight, and the people within the house did not survive. People within the house were the lady of the house and her children. Now, some stories, some accounts say 3 children, some say 5. I'm not sure. But their ghosts are believed to still haunt the building, which these days is a clothing shop. It used to be a bookshop. People have said that they have seen figures on the stairs, what appears to be the figures of children at the top of the stairs on the landing, as though they're waiting for someone to come and rescue them. And they've also seen a female figure halfway up the stairs, as though trying to get up to where they are. Workers in the shop have also said that they have heard the voices of children coming from upstairs. Sometimes children laughing and playing, but more often children shouting in fear. And the site where that house tragically burned down with the people inside it. And that is where we are going to finish our tonight's Ghost Tour of Shrewsbury. So I hope you've had a nice experience of Shrewsbury's darker side this evening. We